While we do not know the specifics of the NFL schedule coming up for the 2021 season, we at least do know who our opponents are going to be. So today we'll break that down. We have the home games, the away games. We don't know which order these teams are going to be appearing on the schedule, but we at least do know who the opposition is going to be. So we'll just break that down really quick in this video. So I believe we're going to be entering a critical year for the Mike Zimmer era, right? We just come off a disappointing 7-9 season, didn't play very well at home, didn't play very well against teams with winning records. And if you look over my shoulder, just a quick glance at this, there's a lot of winning teams on this schedule next year, and these are a lot of good teams. We're looking at a pretty difficult schedule, and while we won't know exactly until the full schedules are released with travel dates and start times and prime time and whatnot, I think when the schedules do come out in their official capacity, we're going to be looking at one of the more difficult ones heading into the 2021 season. Now, of course, we still have the entire offseason to go. We still have the draft. We still have free agency. Coaching changes could happen. I think most of these teams are pretty well set, other than the Detroit Lions are currently looking for a head coach. We could have trades. We could have injuries. There's a lot of dominoes that need to fall before we get to the start of next season. But for right now, this is the data that we have. And the data that we have is pretty terrifying considering the season that we just had. So first, we'll split this up and we'll start with the home games. We have 6 playoff teams slated to come to Minnesota next season, and all 8 opponents at home will have a combined win-loss record of 77-51. That is pretty intense. You have the Browns and the Steelers from the AFC North. You, of course, have the Packers, Lions, and Bears from our own division. The Cowboys, we will be playing them again next season. And then we also get to face, once again, the Seahawks and the Rams. So very excited that we don't have to go to Seattle this year. Really, I'm tired of it. And so they'll be coming to Minnesota for the first time in what feels like a while. As far as the rest of the home games go, Browns and Steelers, perennial playoff teams. The Cleveland game will be, of course, the Kevin Stefanski revenge game. They're suffering a little bit heading into their heading into their wild card weekend matchup with Pittsburgh. But next season, depending on some of the changes that they make, that could be a very, very tough opponent. And it sort of reminds me back to the year that we played Cleveland. I believe it was in Minnesota. It was the week after the Trent Richardson trade, where the entire fan base, well, not the entire fan base, but it felt like the entire fan base sort of gave up on them. And then they came into Minnesota and they surprised us. So I think that's going to be a game that we can't really ignore anymore. The Browns are for real now, and that's just another tough opponent. Steelers are always a tough opponent. The last time I remember playing them, it was the first game of the Case Keenum year in 2017. I don't remember if there's been a game between them since. Of course, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. It's always tough to play the divisional opponents, and the Cowboys will probably have Dak Prescott next year. So losing to them with Andy Dalton is embarrassing enough. How good are they going to be when they have another year of off-season conditioning, another draft class, another free agent class, plus potentially getting Dak Prescott back? Yikes. Wow, that's going to be tough. Rams are always a tough game. Seahawks are always a tough game, as we saw this year when we lost to them thanks to a really, really poor performance in the third quarter in Seattle. So that is the slate of home games. And I think one of the big differences that we got to talk about that was a big sort of negative for us this year was the lack of attendance at games. And then, that affected everybody, but I think just in the bubble that is Minnesota, that affected us greatly, not having that home field advantage. Because you remember in seasons past, like in 2018, 2019, Mike Zimmer gets up to the podium in front of the media and he addresses the fans like, we need our fans to come out, we need them to be excited, to be loud, all these other sorts of things that you would expect from a home game. And we didn't have that this year. And I think that's one of the things that makes playing in US Bank Stadium very advantageous for the Minnesota Vikings, is because the fans turn it into a very tough place to play. It's a very intimidating environment, especially when it's indoors. Very loud. I mean, you go back to the Minnesota Miracle and you look at the tapes on YouTube of the non-broadcast tapes where it's just filmed from the sideline where they're measuring the sound level in decibels. Like, holy cow, that was the loudest thing I think I've ever heard outside of a warehouse full of jet engines. So getting the fans back this season should help alleviate some of the pressure that we're going to be facing with this absolute slew of playoff teams coming to Minnesota next year. So the home games, that's it for that in a nutshell. Now, you would expect a 7-9 season like we had this year to sort of benefit you in scheduling next year. Hasn't happened. But you look at the away games here, there's some advantages. So for the away games, we have Baltimore, Cincinnati cleaning up with the AFC North competition. We, of course, have Detroit, Green Bay, and Chicago. Chicago's always a tough place for us to play. We win very infrequently in Chicago. Then we're also traveling to San Francisco, Carolina, and Arizona. And I specifically left San Francisco, Carolina, and Arizona as last because those are the furthest places that we are going to have to travel this season. And depending on how the schedule lines up, you know, what order these teams appear on the schedule, there's a potential where we might be one of the teams in the league that doesn't have to travel as much back to back to back to back. So hopefully we don't see like the Panthers road game and the 49ers road game in back-to-back weeks, because that's basically crisscrossing the country in the span of 14 days. Outside of that, we also have the advantage of not a lot of these teams are playoff teams. Of course, there's some overlap with Green Bay, but the only other two playoff teams on this side are, well, Green Bay and Chicago. The only other one playoff team is the Baltimore Ravens, who is always a tough opponent. The Bengals will be an interesting game just because we're going to get to play against Joe Burrow, who I hope fully recovers from his injuries. The 49ers game will be interesting because I believe they're going to be moving on from Jimmy Garoppolo, looking for a more mobile quarterback, potentially a Trey Lance in the NFL draft. The Panthers will likely lose their offensive coordinator, Joe Judge, who is already interviewing for head coaching positions. I believe the latest news report I heard was him being looked at by the New York Giants. Or not the New York Giants, I'm sorry. What team was it? Maybe it was Detroit, I forget. Or no, it was Houston. That's who it was. It was Houston. The Cardinals are an incredibly difficult team to scheme against with Kyler Murray's skill set. And do we have a corner that can currently stop DeAndre Hopkins? I'm not so sure. It will take a very, very tough, strenuous offseason of learning by Cam Dantzler, Jeff Gladney. I don't think Mike Hughes is coming back next year to be able to sort of contain DeAndre Hopkins. You can only hope to contain him. I don't think it's actually possible. So that is the away games. So we've mentioned but hopefully we'll be one of the less traveled teams in the league. That will be an advantage. And the home games, of course, we need fans back in the stands to get the advantage back that we had in the years past. Because, I mean, you just look at games from this year, right? We had Dallas, we had Jacksonville, we had Carolina come into Minnesota, and those were all close games that just shouldn't have been. And if we would have had fans in those stands, I think those games would have been much easier. As far as the season as a whole goes, I'm very concerned about where we're going to end up this time next year because there's a lot of good teams on this schedule, especially the home games, which we've mentioned ad nauseum at this point. Mike Zimmer needs to do better against teams with winning records. Kirk Cousins needs to do better against teams with winning records. This is going to be the prove-it year, if there ever was one. And if we are out of the playoffs or a one-and-done at this point next season, I think the structural changes that we're all looking for will come to fruition. So that's going to do it for this video, a closer look at the 2021 NFL opponents for the Minnesota Vikings. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.